Revered and respected by our ancestors for thousands of years, demonized and suppressed by the war on drugs, and now at the dawn of a new millennia, they are making their triumphant return. Scientists, researchers, and patients alike are exploring these ancient therapies to heal modern ailments. And we're here to bring you the latest in scientific research, cutting-edge practices, and first-hand experiences from those who have been transformed in body, mind, and spirit by plant medicines from cannabis to psilocybin to ayahuasca and beyond. This is the Plant Medicine Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Plant Medicine Podcast. I'm Dr. Lynn Marie Morsky, your guide on this journey, and today we are going to be talking about psychedelics and breathwork with Kyle Buller. Kyle earned his BA in transpersonal psychology from Burlington College, where he focused on studying the healing potential of non-ordinary states of consciousness by exploring shamanism, Reiki, local medicinal plants and plant medicine, and holotropic breathwork. Kyle has been studying breathwork since October 2010 with Lenny and Elizabeth Gibson of Dream Shadow Transpersonal Breathwork. Kyle later earned his MS in clinical mental health counseling with an emphasis in somatic psychology. Kyle's clinical background in mental health consists of working with at-risk teenagers in crisis and with individuals experiencing an early episode of psychosis. Now, if you are not familiar with breathwork, you are in for a treat because there is a way to access a non-ordinary state of consciousness without leaving your room, without having to procure a substance that may or may not be legal where you live. And it is breathwork. And breathwork is much more than just okay, take some deep breaths. There are a lot of specific techniques that can be used to ramp up our psyche, to tune down our psyche, to adjust our nervous system in different ways. And as Kyle will educate us on, different ways that the breath work that we're using can affect our psychedelic experience and how psychedelics can help us in turn with our breath work. And so this for me was a very fascinating episode, and I hope you find it so as well. Now, before we get to Kyle, just a reminder that if you or someone you know is a clinician on the front lines of healthcare and they would like to learn more about psychedelic medicines and how they can be used in patient care, please visit the Psychedelic Medicine Association at psychedelicmedicineassociation.org. Our mission there is to educate those who are taking care of patients on these new medicines and how that they can best be used to benefit the patient so that we can all improve our mental health together. Again, that is psychedelicmedicineassociation.org, and we hope to see you all there. Now, without further ado, thank you so much for joining us today, Kyle.
I'm excited to be here, Lynn Marie. Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. I had Joe on at some point, your partner in Psychedelics Today Crime. And so I'm very glad that you and I finally get to connect on the show. I would love if you could start by telling the listeners a little bit about what breathwork is, just in general, for those who may not be familiar.
Yeah, thank you. So breathwork is an umbrella term which really encompasses many different breathing techniques. So there's lots of different breathing schools out there, or schools of breathwork. So it's just a pretty generic term that kind of captures different breathing practices. So if people hear breathwork from Psychedelics Today, we're probably talking about the lineage of holotropic breathwork and dream shadow transpersonal breathwork. That's the lineage that we come from. And so when we talk about breathwork, it's a technique that really kind of fosters self-discovery. It's a deep, intensified breathing technique that elicits a holotropic state of consciousness or non-ordinary state of consciousness. I tend to like the word holotropic state of consciousness. And people can have really profound experiences. And people can have catharsis. They could, have deep psychological insights, spiritual experiences with this practice. So yeah, I'll leave it there, and you can follow up.
Sure. So that's a great introduction, and I like how you focus on the fact that it's not just one technique. And in fact, there are breathwork techniques that can do a lot of different things. There are certain breath techniques that can increase your parasympathetic, or like you said, there are some that can help you with deep transformation. I do a breathwork practice every morning that leaves me feeling as if I am in a psychedelic state, even though I have taken nothing for the day. And it's only a 20-minute recording that I listen to and go along with. And so as I was doing that one day, I was like, I've got to have this on the show, just this topic, because I know that there are even deeper states you can get into. And so if you could talk a little bit about how you got into breath work, and maybe, so you mentioned some of the styles that you all focus on. Can you talk about maybe some of the styles that you have studied, or that people in the psychedelic world may use more in that deep transformative search?
Yeah, so I'm guessing we'll probably stick with holotropic breath work, and that lineage. And so I guess I'll give a little rundown of how I got introduced to this. So I was in my undergrad studying transpersonal psychology, and there was a 1 credit weekend workshop at my school in holotropic breath work. And I looked at it, and so this breathing technique was developed by Dr. Stanislav and his wife, Christina Groff. And for those that don't know who Stan Groff is, who just had a birthday recently, I think he's 90. Happy birthday, Stan. um, he ended up developing this technique with his wife at Esalen. And again, it's a deep breathing technique that can foster this holotropic state of consciousness. So I was at my undergrad, and people were talking about how this breathing technique could be a psychedelic experience. And I was pretty skeptical and thinking, I don't know about that. But everybody was around school that went to this workshop who was really kind of hyping it up. So I signed up, obviously, because I was interested, and the whole reason why I was doing a transpersonal psychology degree was because of Stan Groff and reading his book and having some really profound psychedelic experiences and a near-death experience. And so I was really just trying to figure out my own process at that time. And when I went down there, I had a pretty profound experience. Relived my near-death experience, relived this birth process that I didn't really know anything about, but kind of confirmed it with my mom, and had some really deep catharsis, and had a different way of processing my inner experience and trauma. So that really turned me on to the power of this technique. And what makes it interesting for those interested in psychedelics is really like Stan's framework that he brings to the table with this certain style of breath work. So Stan is really kind of putting his transpersonal theories into the practice as well. And so Stan was a pioneer in LSD research, and when he came over to America, continued to do some of the research down in Maryland. Counterculture hit, war on drugs happened, had to put all that research on hold. And so when he was at Esalen, he was a scholar in residence, writing up some books. They asked him to put on a workshop. And, around that time, I mean, he said that there was a lot of like yogis and shamans and stuff coming through. And by that point, Leonard Orr already had what was called rebirthing breath work. So Leonard Orr discovered this breathing technique by sitting in a hot tub and intensifying his breathing, and talked about how he relived his birth. So there was already kind of like these breathing techniques, especially through the yogic tradition. And I think Stan also used deep breathing to help with integrating psychedelic experiences. I was just going back and reading his book, LSD Psychotherapy, and he was talking about for, say, difficult experiences, or people kind of get caught in a process and it hasn't fully resolved, they would sometimes utilize deep breathing to reactivate that process. And so having, all this kind of wisdom ended up creating this breathing technique that produces kind of like a psychedelic experience in a sense. And so again, Stan kind of putting his framework from all this clinical research into the breathwork modality as well. And it's offered a really great tool for training, for understanding how to sit with people in non-ordinary states of consciousness. Rick Doblin was one of the first to go through some of the first training with holotropic breathwork, and MAPS does use breathwork as a way to offer people an experience with a non-ordinary state through breathwork. And so a lot of that work that Stan did, has been cornerstone of a lot of the psychedelic psychotherapy, pulling from some, the earlier research, how they were sitting with people. And, it's kind of infused in the breathwork model. You have two people, you have the breather, the sitter sitting with somebody in a while the breather is having their experience. And then, we're talking about like Stan's cartography of the human psyche. So really understanding transpersonal experiences, perinatal experiences. So talking about that birth process and how that could really impact somebody's life. So it's very interconnected with the psychedelic movement. And that was actually one of the reasons why Joe and I started Psychedelics Today, was to kind of bring the narrative of Stan's work and breathwork back into the psychedelic conversation. And I'm been really excited to see breathwork has really taken off in the past 5 years or so. I mean, when I started getting into this, nobody was really talking about it as much. And, now there's a lot of these other umbrellas, or these other kind of schools of breathwork that have really taken off. Like Wim Hof breathing has really taken off and gained a lot of popularity. There's like transformational breathwork, shamanic breathwork, and a lot of these kind of originate from the same place of like, Wilhelm Reich, and then Leonard Orr, and Stan Grof's work, and everybody kind of ends up taking it and doing maybe their own thing. And so that's what our teachers are doing as well with Dream Shadow Transpersonal Breathwork. They're students and colleagues of Stan. They're certified in holotropic breathwork, facilitate holotropic breathwork, but they're at their age where they want to pass on their work in their own unique way. And so we're calling it Dream Shadow Transpersonal Breathwork. And our teacher Lenny kind of integrates a little bit of philosophy into understanding these experiences. So it makes it a little bit different, but the technique and practice is relatively the same.
And do you happen to know what it is in our physiology with these different types of breath work that is able to lead the mind into the same spaces that psychedelics can?
I don't think we have enough data there yet. I think there is a study. I'm not really too sure what the folks at Imperial are doing, but I think they are trying to look into that eventually. I could be speaking prematurely on some of the conversations I've had with some people over there, but I think from like brain mechanisms, what's going on in the body. I don't think we really understand why this is doing it. I mean, we could look at the changes in blood alkalinity, so the blood becomes a little bit more alkaline. Does that cause, like, what type of physiological changes does that have on the body and mind? I know Stan has kind of made this correlation between oxygen level and CO2 levels in the body, and correlating to people that lived in higher elevation, so like those that lived in the Andes and had these higher kind of spiritual practices, or more maybe spiritually evolved. And so maybe there's something there, but yeah, from like the neuroscience perspective, I don't know if we really understand it. There hasn't, from my research, I didn't really come across too much fMRI data on what's going on in the brain and whatnot. So yeah, hard to answer that.
It seems it would be tricky because while you're doing a lot of these breathing, there's a lot of movement. So the fMRI may
Yeah.
be, have to be something that was done immediately thereafter so that you could have a still head to MRI. Um,
Yeah.
a- as I have experienced it just in my own life, and maybe you can verify or deny this, it seems as though breath work has maybe a lower barrier to entry, whereas to be, let's say, get the benefits of the full benefits of meditation, it seems to take so much longer. And there's, I don't know, it just, the technique has to be right and this and that. Whereas breath work, I've gone in, like you said, you did your 1 day workshop and you had all those experiences. Is that my imagination, or does it seem that breath work just seems to be something that's more easily accessible without necessarily years of practice?
Well, I guess they're kind of different experiences, right? Like when I think of like meditation, I think about like clearing the mind, really getting still in the body, versus like, yeah, some breathing techniques, like these more deeply cathartic techniques, they're bringing up a lot of emotional memory. And people are starting to work through a lot of somatic sensations. They're working through trauma. And so, that may feel like it's kind of like accelerating the process. And, when we think about psychedelics as well, we think about, these are deeply profound because they foster this type of experience of oneness, or, oh, I got to relive this birth process, and I got deep insight on, what was going on in my life, or, kind of going back in time and working with biographical material. And so, yeah, I think there's a difference there, but that helps us to maybe understand how to show up in meditation a little bit more when we have these experiences. Maybe it helps us to clear our minds a little bit more, and we go, oh, actually I can anchor to my breath to be in the present moment. So yeah, that's the kind of the way I approach it. But yeah, there is something that's interesting, that it does elicit an experience. Meditation doesn't always elicit an experience for somebody. Maybe it's just like they get caught up in their monkey mind and go, oh, I just had a bunch of thoughts. Whereas breath work, you might be having a lot of thoughts, but there's also this re-experiencing of something in your life. And for some reason, that feels more profound than, say, maybe sitting in meditation and re-experiencing. And I think it's because of that catharsis that's accompanied with the breath work. There might be shaking. People might feel so deeply into whatever that memory is or that wound, and they feel like they want to cry. They want to let it out in a certain way. They want to scream. Sometimes people do get those visual representations that are so strong. Like, I just remember back to that first experience I had. It was like, boom, deep kind of DMT like visions back to my near death experience. And that was like, whoa, what is going on here? But some of the other things were just very deeply somatic, of like feeling this umbilical cord, or this cord wrapping around my body, wrapping around my neck, coughing, gasping for air, and thinking like, I'm choking right now, but wait, I'm breathing, I'm in this space, what the hell is going on? I feel like I'm being born. And that makes it more interesting. You go, okay, well, what's going on here? How could I just have an experience? I'm not getting that type of experience with meditation,
Right.
for the most part.
Right, right. Oh, that brings up a lot of questions. Well, first off, I wanted to harken back to something you said, where you suggested that breathwork can kind of clear the mind for meditation. That's what I have found effective. Is that if I try to sit down to meditate, monkey mind all over the place, if I do my breathwork practice, at the end, I actually want to lay there and meditate because
Yeah.
I'm so primed for it. I'm in a, like, I think, I don't know, my nervous system has chilled, my mind has been freed, and I think some of those breathwork practices, like in the middle of my practice, there's some breath holds. Well, while you're doing a
Hmm.
breath hold, you kind of, there's nothing else you can really focus on besides making sure you don't breathe. And I think that really, if you can't calm your monkey mind down in any other way, then focusing on not breathing is a, is a really good way. So I think there's that synergy. But I wanted to ask because, let's say the practice I do every day, it brings up some tingling. I see, some colors in my like mind's eye, but I'm not having the full on like rebirth thing. How, in the people that you teach, how often do you recommend kind of that more intense breath work?
I think that's a kind of a individual question depending on how it's being offered. Like, I think about, so typically this is done in a retreat format or a very long day. So like the teachers that I've studied with, we're there Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Saturday and Sunday are breathing days. So one person breathes, one person sits, and then you flip flop the next day. This is kind of more of a retreat format, which, makes it interesting because it's really creating a container. You're kind of like, you're showing up, you're leaving everything behind for the weekend, and you're really allowed to be with yourself that whole weekend. It was really great being in Vermont, not having cell service, or, years ago, they didn't have like Wi-Fi in one of their lodging. So it was really, you're really just turned at like, yeah, turned off of technology and whatnot. Things have advanced, and you can now you get Wi-Fi there. But there's something about that container, and this is something that our teacher Lenny brings up, is that, the whole art around this, there's so many different components, and how we really create that container also really fosters that experience that people can have. So I think at the height of it, I was doing it maybe once a month whenever they were running workshops. Sometimes it felt pretty destabilizing of like the amount of content that was coming up, where I had to like back off, or I couldn't, make retreats, or I couldn't do that. When I moved back to New Jersey, I didn't have a whole team of people to work with. So I've been learning to work with it in a little bit of a different way. And I've also, when I was living in Burlington, I was also catering to mostly college students, since Burlington was a very college town. And I'm thinking, how the hell am I going to get like all these people to hang out for, 10, 14 hours? You could also do it in one long day where you have two breathers back to back. People want to be outside. So I've shortened it and condensed it to kind of do more of these intro workshops. And I think those shorter sessions, you could probably engage with that a few times a month. I like to think about it as like, being able to like clear the pipes out. We're always accumulating stuff. And how do we use these practices to just clear things out? The retreat format and those longer workshops, I mean, really kind of just based on, income levels and, can people afford it? Can people afford time off? When can you engage in that? And then, maybe these kind of shorter form sessions, sessions you could do, a couple times a month, to really kind of, clear things out. I think about my practice now. It comes and goes where I'll combine kind of these short form breath works by myself with, somatics and meditation and whatnot. And so I really think breath work is a flexible tool and it can be utilized in a lot of different ways. So, maybe I'm doing like a short breath work session for myself for like 30 minutes. I'm like, okay, wow, I just really needed that to either get going, or I really needed that to clear things out. When I can go to a retreat or a long workshop, that's going to create a much different container and a different experience, and also provide that safety to work through like, bigger stuff, to have that large catharsis, to really get into it. And then the whole aspect of body work that's involved that, you may not be able to do by yourself. So yeah, thinking about it as this flexible tool and just trying to figure out like, yeah, what feels good for somebody. Sometimes, I mean, when I was really in it, like I felt like I really needed to work through that material as much as possible. It felt like an initiation where I was like, all right, I just need to keep engaging in this practice. And the same could be said with psychedelics, right? Like, how often do people use? Well, there's some people that go to retreats and they're engaged in that process for a week, a month, whatever that is, and then maybe they have time off, and maybe they find other ways to bring that medicine into their lives, whether that's through meditation or developing other practices. So I see it kind of in the same way, like, what's your path to self-discovery, personal development, spirituality, when to engage in a practice, when to get space from it, etc. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for transitioning into psychedelics here, because I would love to hear from you how you think that different types of breathwork practices may be helpful in the preparation and integration around psychedelic journeys.
Yeah, great question. I think breathwork is a wonderful preparation tool for those that are thinking about entering into the journey space. And so, some clients that I work with that are prepping for it and maybe never had an experience, I'll offer breathwork as a modality to learn how to go into that space, so they get at least somewhat of an understanding. Obviously, it's a bit different, but at least they have an understanding of what that catharsis could feel like, what that experience with a non-ordinary state could feel like. They can start to develop that skill set. One question that I get asked pretty often is, can you do breath work while on psychedelics? And obviously it's a little bit different. And so the way I like to view a lot of these things is that we have these vehicles, whether it's psychedelic, breath work, meditation, we can look at like different rites of passages. These are all vehicles to get to this this one kind of state, this primary state. And in when we take a psychedelic, it's like that's the vehicle that gets us there. But we can use breath as a way to modulate and regulate our nervous system while we're in the psychedelic experience. So it's a really great navigation tool. When do I notice my nervous system is starting to become too overactive, like too hypervigilant? Well, could I use slow, deep breathing to slow that down? Could I use that to go into a process? Ooh, I notice like I want to make a process bigger. Can you use deeper, intensified breathing to make that process bigger, to go into it? And so, we can look at breath as a really interesting vehicle to help to navigate the psychedelic experience. And then on the integration side, I think it's a wonderful integration tool to be able to like have a psychedelic experience and then have another way to process it. And what I found really beneficial with breathwork when I first stumbled across it was I had all these psychedelic experiences in my early 20s, and they left me pretty ungrounded. And they left me ungrounded for various reasons. Because of my near-death experience, I was already kind of pretty dissociated at times and disconnected and kind of living in that kind of ethereal state. And so there's a lot of this physical trauma and psychospiritual trauma that I was working through. Psychedelics helped me to kind of like get back to there and make sense of it and process it. And there's somewhat of a magic in there of going, oh, if I keep going in there, maybe I'll figure out all the answers. But that left me pretty ungrounded, and philosophically it left me in a sometimes a huge existential crisis of, oh my god, what the hell am I doing here? And breath work, when I stumbled across breath work, I realized that wow, I have been so detached that this helped me get back to my body. So it was like breathwork was like the anchor to bring psyche back into my body to then process what I've been neglecting because I couldn't go there because I kept detaching in that psychedelic state and going, oh, like I just need to detach and go into the transpersonal or go into these ethereal realms and yeah, nothing matters here. But yeah, breathwork helped me to kind of bring psyche back in and say, hey, listen, you have a body, you have all this stuff built up in here, and now we can work with it in a different way. And so that can be a really grounding tool on like during the integration process. It can also help us process things differently, get into more of that somatic processing. We use body work in the breath work as well. And so like when stuck emotions or energy come up, like we can work with that. And that was really helpful to be like, oh, wow, yeah, there's all this stuff in here. And let me like, work through that in a different way. So
Interesting, because I'm picturing all these, like, as you're talking about different examples, because I think at the beginning you were talking about if somebody feels as though they went through a psychedelic experience, but there's some maybe unfinished piece of that, you said that perhaps you can do some breath work to kind of go back to that state and then perhaps finish. Is that what you were suggesting?
yeah, I mean, well, again, like thinking about that, these are vehicles of psyche, I'll say, and coming from like Groff sometimes will talks about these like unresolved like matrices or gestalts, and one thing that really caught my attention with Groff's work was I had this experience where I just had a prolonged psychedelic experience when I was 20, 21. And it left me super ungrounded. And I came across Stan's work then. And he talked about how sometimes the unconscious during these experiences where it gets amplified. So thinking about bringing the unconscious to the surface to be processed, but you're not really processing it. And so it's still unfolding. And then once the experience subsides, it still continues to process in the unconscious. And so if we have this unresolved matrix or gestalt, then breathwork could be another way to bring that back to the surface to then resolve or work through in a different way. So yeah, Stan talked about like in his book LSD Psychotherapy on that integration side. If somebody had a really difficult experience that they were trying to work through, sometimes they would incorporate deep breathing to bring that to the surface. Again, in deeper, faster breaths bring stuff to the surface. And we could think about that as like more sympathetic nervous system, right? Like that activation, it's bringing content to the surface, it's more driving. So yeah, if stuff is like latent in the unconscious, just kind of simmering there, we can use that breath to then bring it back to the surface to then process. And then we'll talk about that inner healing intelligence from like the Groff perspective that, okay, once it's to the surface, now we're able to work with it. So hopefully that's helpful.
Absolutely. And then I'm also thinking of the other example, because I know that you and your course with spiritual emergence versus emergency, is there a role for breath work if somebody is perhaps having one of those spiritual emergency times where perhaps they're unable to get maybe out? I mean, I've been at one psychedelic retreat where there was a woman who for like 3 days, just from the first dose, just could not seem to like come back to herself, come back
Mm.
to her body. Is that has there been shown to be a role for breath work in kind of regrounding in that instance?
There hasn't been much research, I don't think, within like the holotropic lineage. I mean, that does come from Stan's lineage of non-ordinary states of consciousness, um, but yeah, breath work. But hold on, yeah, just trying to do something. I got a lot of thoughts going in my head right now. So that is one contraindication for somebody to come to a breathwork experience. I remember I checked off spiritual emergence when I was doing a workshop with Stan. Stan called me up and I was like, oh man, are these going to tell me I can't participate? I told him I had this near death experience and, I was working through it with the Gibsons and, I was relatively fine. But that is kind of like a warning flag if somebody is in spiritual emergence. And what it really comes down to, I believe, is the container. If you're opening somebody up more, do you have the container to hold them in that process? So for example, like I went in, I worked with people with early episode psychosis in a container where they lived for 3 to 6 months. There's some people that were on the edge of, yeah, that psychosis. And I thought, oh man, what if we just like bring this stuff to the surface through breath work? Could that be beneficial? And I found that actually, when somebody is so in their process, that actually might not be the best thing. The best thing would probably to be more grounding type of breath work, until their nervous system is more regulated to then resolve that stuff. And so my thinking has changed a little bit about it over the years. But if you asked me this question years ago, I'd say, yeah, like, let's do breath work to help people move through it. Having those experiences has kind of brought me to the other side, where I'm looking at trauma much differently. I'm looking at, somebody's nervous system and being like, can their nervous system tolerate this? And so thinking about somebody that is at an ayahuasca retreat, they're very like ungrounded, depending where they're at. Like, I'm thinking, how could we use just more slower, deeper grounding breaths? And then also grounding techniques to get them back in their body, before then kind of catapulting them out again. And there might be times when maybe doing that is appropriate. Maybe they are in that container and there is maybe just some weird somatic stuff that isn't getting resolved with ayahuasca, where breath work could help resolve some of that. So I think it's a very nuanced question to discuss. And I don't think there's any like hard answers there. I think we really need to look at somebody's whole picture, where they're at, how they could potentially benefit, look at their nervous system, kind of attune to that, and really think about what they could tolerate, what's going on in somebody's psyche. So
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I'm thinking, because as you described, there's so many different types of breath work and the aims of what that specific technique does. But you can imagine almost any circumstance where somebody is uncomfortable in any which way, shape, or form. Generally, the response is, all right, take a breath, right? Like, we always go straight to the breath. But I think that's a good place to maybe illustrate if somebody has not heard about breath work and isn't familiar with this. I mean, I just learned this because I went to Soma is the technique that I use, and I went to one of their workshops, and they were instructing, like, for parasympathetic, to increase your parasympathetic, which is your rest and digest, which is probably, I'm assuming, what you'd want to do if somebody is a little bit overworked and they want to kind of bring
yeah.
down, is where your inhale is shorter than your exhale. So you're spending more time in the exhalation, as opposed to, like you said, if you're trying to get somebody in that sympathetic state to bring things up, then the breath seemed to be more even, or maybe if you could describe a little bit of just some of kind of the basic differences between how the styles can affect the physiology.
Yeah, awesome. And I guess I'll chat a little bit about my master's thesis. And so I was really thinking about this in terms of trauma treatment. And so I was really kind of approaching it, and how could I incorporate my work with transpersonal and holotropic breath work into, say, a counseling perspective, and thinking about trauma treatment. So really thinking about people's nervous systems. So I broke it down into like 3 phases. The first would be somebody that is so kind of hypervigilant, overactive nervous system, kind of what we were talking about before. How can we use those slower, deep breaths into the belly? So taking a big inhale, bringing it just way down, holding it, long exhale, pausing, really getting grounded. Maybe you're doing that with your feet on the ground, and really just paying attention to grounding that energy. So again, yeah, activating that parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and digest. And then, there's all these ideas around how that's also stimulating the vagus nerve, and how that can be really helpful. So when I think about people that are there, so I'm thinking in terms of PTSD, somebody that is like, very severely traumatized. They can't come in without even just like getting in and being overly active. So thinking about, how do we slow that process down? Let's pump the brakes. Let's not even try to get into like too much content. Let's slow it down. And then once somebody is able to then start to process, the second phase is kind of broken up into two sections. Somebody that might be more depressed energy, like the content is there, but it's just, it's not moving as much. We can use faster, deeper breathing in short sessions to bring that content to the surface to process. So yeah, somebody is like trying to work through stuff, but it's just, there's just, the energy is pretty stagnant. We can use that deeper, faster breathing to bring it up, so that thinking about activating that sympathetic nervous system. And then if there's the person is already actively in their process, but they're able to tolerate that. So thinking about that window of tolerance, okay, they're able to tolerate a little bit of stimulation. How can we use like some of the somatic techniques of more kind of like, I'm thinking about like doing some body work. So, okay, noticing, oh, I feel this anxiety in my stomach, like, and this process is starting to get amplified already. And okay, I feel this anxiety in my stomach. What does it feel like to really start to breathe into that deeper, maybe a little bit faster? What does it feel like to breathe a little bit slower? What does it feel like to, maybe massage your stomach? What does it feel like to put a little pressure on that? So how are we starting to then go into the body a little bit more to resolve anything that's coming up? And then the third would be outside the clinical scope and kind of going in that self-development, spiritual development in retreat format with something more long form, like holotropic breath work, transpersonal breath work. But yeah, so I guess that kind of gives you an overview of how I'm thinking about it. These slower, meditative, deeper breathing techniques, more grounding energy, just thinking about where a person is. If somebody is more kind of shut down and closed off, how can we use that deeper intensified breathing to stimulate energy? And then, yeah, just really trying to tune into your nervous system and thinking about that window of tolerance. How much can you tolerate without either getting shut down or becoming too overactive? So again, the breath is this flexible tool. It's a vehicle. We can help to regulate our nervous system with it and explore it. And so,
Yes.
yeah.
I appreciate that. That's a fantastic description. I think, even for the Breathwork 101 person, that gives them a visual picture of the wide range of abilities you can get with different breath techniques. We talked a little bit about how breath work can be helpful in the realm of psychedelic journeys before, during, and after. Is there anything on the reverse of that? Is there a way in which psychedelics can assist in breath work?
Yeah, I think about like, I wonder what my experiences would have been like if I haven't had psychedelics beforehand. And I think I see this in workshops, people that have no experience with it. And they have, an experience with breath work. Think, that was interesting, but, it wasn't that profound. And, they go, I don't know, not too much has happened. And thinking about the people that were already kind of prepped with psychedelics, it really like that window is available. Like people are able to go into that. So I think psychedelics, it's an easier way to open those doors. I think once we have those like neural networks open within us, they're there to explore. It's like those doors don't shut. And then it could really enhance the breathwork experience because we have some sort of map of the psyche at that point. And again, the breath is a vehicle to kind of go into that. And so if people have already opened up in that way, I think it might make the breathwork experience a little bit more psychedelic at times because you might, yeah, you already kind of have that map there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also, I'm thinking back to one time I was doing breath work and I was seemingly feeling a lot more sensation than normal. And then I remembered, oh, I had taken a microdose earlier that day. And it's a microdose is usually subperceptible, but then when you're already going into that slightly altered state or holotropic state, as you call it, and then there's something on board, it seems to actually be more perceptible because that's kind of
Yeah.
the realm in which it already lives or wants to go if it were on a larger dose. I don't know
Yeah.
if there's been much investigation in that realm, but they seem to have a decent synergy
I could
when,
imagine.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that brings up just like a question on relationship, right? So you're talking about, oh, microdosing, doing some breath work. Well, what is your relationship to the psychedelic experience, to the mushrooms? And again, thinking about these being vehicles, that like, okay, maybe you've already had this experience with mushrooms, now you're microdosing, and so you already have this like relationship with that. And then we're adding some breath work into it, and so okay, the mushrooms in me, I'm already feeling that energy, I'm amplifying the breath. Maybe I don't need a huge macro dose right now to feel into that. Now we're starting to get more kind of in that transpersonal shamanic kind of worldview of like relationship with a substance. We could look at, say, some of those shamanic initiations of just getting flood dose after flood dose after flood dose, and then shamans being able to take very small doses to enter into that state again. It doesn't take much. Like I even think about that with breath work. Before, it used to take me a really long time to get into a certain state. Now, like sometimes when I do it, I'm just so aware of the content that's charged. Like I'm already off in another world going through the relaxation. It only takes like a few deep breaths for me to start to process things. So yeah, I think it kind of comes back to our relationship with our psyche, our like kind of inner landscape, and how does that all play a role?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. By the way, for myself and everybody else out there, if you could give us a definition of transpersonal, because I first off, it was dream, shadow, transpersonal breath work,
Yeah,
and I'm like,
yeah.
okay, I think we need all those terms, but I think transpersonal is the one that comes up a lot that I would love to hear your definition of.
Yeah, well, transpersonal just means beyond the personal. So, transpersonal psychology was kind of branched out of humanistic psychology. A group of people got together: Stan Grof, Maslow, Anthony Stewart, and James Fadiman, and probably a few others. And they realized they needed a new field to really kind of contain these experiences that go beyond quote unquote normal consciousness. So, looking at experiences through meditation, dreams, near death experiences, psychedelic experiences, paranormal experiences, outer body experiences. And so, yeah, it's transpersonal psychology is really looking at the human phenomenon that Western science has a hard time trying to put a box around, saying this is what's going on. So transpersonal psychology is really trying to understand exceptional human experience. Um,
Interesting. Well, thank you for that description. And thank you for just being a fountain of knowledge in all of these areas. I don't even know that we had discussed that your thesis was on breathwork. So this was just like an extra treat. Just when I thought of like, who am I going to go to for breathwork? I'm like, I'm going to Kyle. And I'm so glad that you were willing to come on and share with us. Kyle, would you please tell everybody where to find you and your show and all your courses and all of the fantastic things that the Psychedelics Today family is putting out?
Yeah, sure. You can check us out at psychedelicstoday.com. And then you can subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. And then if you're interested in any education, you can check that out through psychedelicstoday.com. You could lead there, but it's psychedeliceducationcenter.com. We have some free classes up there. You just kind of mentioned one, spiritual emergence or psychosis. That's a free webinar up there. We have another free one, 8 common mistakes, which I'm guessing your audience aren't newbies to psychedelics, but could be good reminders of harm reduction. And we also have a 8-week online program called Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists. So if you're interested in getting more involved in the field, if you're just kind of dipping your toes in, you want a nice foundation, we definitely talk a lot of transpersonal psychology in there as well. So, really kind of educating you around what that is and those different worldviews. Yeah, so that's psychedeliceducationcenter.com.
Awesome. And by the way, I appreciate the 8 common mistakes because I do aim the show at, let's say, intro and moderate level of psychedelic education, and I am the first to say the advanced psychonauts I just send to Psychedelics Today. You guys take care of. So I'm very glad that, I mean, you and Joe were very instrumental in my journey, so I always appreciate your help, and I really appreciate you coming on and sharing with us about breathwork today. So Kyle, just huge gratitude to you for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for the invite. Really appreciate everything that you're doing in the world of psychedelics. It's fun watching you you grow and step into this. I'm just thinking back to Horizons. What was that, 2019? And you're
Yes.
just sitting there, and we ended up talking to you. I was like, she looks really familiar. Realizing that I was following you on Instagram, and then just seeing the growth that you've really taken in the past few years. It's really exciting.
Well, I could not have done
So
it
awesome
alone.
job.
And you and Joe were the first people to reach out and give me just a massive helping hand. So thank you guys so much, and appreciate again that you came on the show. And for everybody else out there, until next time. Thanks so much for listening to the Plant Medicine Podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please leave us an iTunes rating or review. It helps other people find the show. And if you'd like to find out more about plant medicine, including the show notes from today's episode, please head over to plantmedicine.org. The music for the Plant Medicine Podcast is by the incredible Porangi. If you'd like to check out his music, please find him at porangi.com or on social media at PORANGUI.